Hello, friends. Welcome to the Christ and Coffee podcast, bringing the church together one coffee hour conversation at a time. Today, we have my friend Craig Simonian on the podcast. Pastor Craig has been a missionary in Tajikistan, one of the pioneers in bringing the church there. He's been a pastor in New Jersey, and now he's full-time serving the community and the young generation in Armenia. Craig, it's so good to see you and to catch up. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. I love seeing you, and I love you. I love your wife. Appreciate your church and your ministry. So this is great. It's great to hang out with you like this.
Of course. It's been quite the year in Armenia. How was it during the war, being there, and how long have you been there?
I've been here 3 years now, and yeah, when you mentioned Tajikistan, when we moved to Tajikistan, the country was at war. So for most of the time we were there, it was at war, and it was quite a devastating time where about 150,000 people were killed, about 1 million refugees. So it was a really rough time. But because of that, the opportunities were really off the charts. We saw things happen that most people working in ministry in the Muslim world would never get to see. And frankly, when we moved to Armenia, we never expected that we would be in a somewhat similar situation, although it was 45 days instead of 5 years. But nonetheless, it was the intensity of the war in Armenia. It was so contracted. I mean, when you think about the fact that relative to the population of Armenia, of the United States of America, that more young Armenians died in those 45 days than the number of Americans that were killed in World War I and World War II combined. I mean, it was so impactful, and every day was overwhelming because every day you got news that someone you knew was killed. I mean, because of it being a country of 3 million, as you all know, that it was just impacting it, and still is. It still is. We just prayed for a woman who her son disappeared, and they just found like part of his wallet, and so they're just doing a DNA smear of what's the ground around him. When we heard about the phosphorus bombs and fires and some of the drones, some of these boys, because they don't have metal dog tags for whatever reason, and so they just have their names on their uniforms. So they're still trying to identify a lot of the boys.
Wow. So you were saying percentage-wise, the amount of young youth lost is compared to the population. It's more than World War I and World War II. Wow. And these aren't trained soldiers, right? They're trained, but they're not like professional soldiers. These are young men. They're in that age range. They're drafted to go fight, or what's the typical soldier like?
That's a good question because it's pretty diverse. So as the war began, the immediate response was a lot of people were volunteering. And then very soon, when we were all getting those words from Erdogan and Turkey that Turkey was going to stand by Azerbaijan, but we didn't know what that meant yet. As soon as it was clear that not only were they bringing over the mercenaries, but they were sending their own special forces, and that they were actually bringing troops, and then that volunteer kind of force sort of was the plea stopped, and rightfully so. It wasn't a lack of courage. It was just, okay, we need to back up, figure out what's actually happening now, because it's a whole other game. Because frankly speaking, I mean, I have a lot of faith for this stuff, but Armenia could never win a war against the NATO's fourth largest army, along with Azerbaijan, along with Pakistan, who was promising to fight to the end for them as well, not to mention a number of surrounding countries, including Georgia, who were backing Azerbaijan. It was just at that point where what's in the world is going to happen here? And so you're right. So we had our standing army. So those who are already drafted. So I wouldn't call them professionals because it's conscription. So every young man is going to do his service time. So those who are already in the army. Then you do have the professional career soldiers, and they are excellent. At the day after the war started, my wife volunteered in the local hospital and was working with wounded soldiers. And because of her, they were letting me come in to pray for the soldiers. So I got to pray for and speak with and minister with a lot of wounded soldiers over the course of the war, during the war. And I would say, like, the professional soldiers were amazing. They were skilled, and everything you'd want in a fighting force. Then you'd have the standing army that they're just putting in their time, and they're just kids, man. You know, they just got pulled out of their home, they shaved their heads, and now they're in the army. And it's rough because the reputation of the army is such that when boys come home, you know, they don't come home quite the same. Uh, and then you had those who were recruited then once after the war started, and uh, those are the ones that really suffered the most. I mean, they were literally playing Nardi backgammon the day before, and suddenly they're drafted. They put on buses. I mean, a friend of mine went to one of the depots where the buses come and drop them off to get their uniforms, like stage one, just to start praying for them. And you know, it's just pretty overwhelming. And by the way, I mean, the older folks too. I mean, everyone in Artsakh fought. I don't, whether they were 70-year-olds or 20-year-olds, they all fought. Everyone. Just every pastor I know in Artsakh was in the war. And but in terms of Armenia, the cutoff was 55. So I'm still eligible. So I had a 3-foot camo backpack sitting at my door every day of the war, completely ready. And my friend lives right in the apartment building next to mine, he's 48, and he was drafted, and he was brought to Susi. So that was a real reality too.
Yeah. So I mean, that you're an Armenian citizen. You're fully committed, and this is your country. Yeah.
I mean, the truth is, I wasn't allowed to leave. Anyone who was of age to fight it was not possible to leave the country without permission. I would never have left the country anyway. Not because I have no fears. It's just I just would simply have never have left. I was preparing though to go to Stepanakert. I did have a journalist who was going to get me in, and so to at least be in the second line where I could probably do more good as a pastor. But the reality is, God opened the doors for us to have a specific niche during the war in supplying some of our special troops some of the equipment that they weren't getting from the government. And so that kept us busy day and night, every day of the war. And we lost some really good people. One friend who was an apostolic priest, he's a true believer in Jesus. He was a wonderful guy, but he was killed. In fact, he's never been recovered. So we just assumed he's not a POW. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So many heroes, so many young men, amazing with the odds against them. They just standing, the braveness, the courage. It just it's overwhelming to from the outside hearing everything. What is your perception on like the global medias and its coverage on this? Because I was extremely frustrated. I think I was aware of corruption in the news, but when this war was breaking out over Artsakh, I never seen so much bias, misinformation from mainstream news outlets. Like initially, I think I'm like a conspiracy theorist for even saying that out loud, but hearing what's on the ground versus hearing what like the BBC is saying, CNN is saying, was just really heartbreaking. What was your feeling being on the in Armenia during this time, like when you're hearing how the media was covering what was happening?
Well, sadly, there's nothing about that we were surprised about, because Armenia's because our secret service or intelligence agency does not actively engage, at least not on a level that we can see or grab hold of, where they're out shaping perception and lobbying. I mean, Turkey is masterful at it. I mean, they've had 106 years lobbying against the recognition of the genocide. It's just, they're good at it. And, Israel, they're excellent at this stuff, intelligence. And I just, I remember when I went to Armenia, and I of course I knew about the Nagorno-Karabakh war. It was a real thing in my life being in America. I was younger, obviously much younger. But I just remember like when I went to Armenia and watching YouTube videos, and for every one video that kind of took a position that saw things through the perspective of Armenia, there would be 19 that were totally from an Azeri point of view. And that's when I realized, their apparatus for getting their point across is so much louder than ours. And when this war started, it became clear that anything we accused them of, would accuse us back. Any letter that we would send to the United Nations or to NATO, they would send another letter saying, no, it was the Armenians that did this. And so they knew how to neutralize the truth. And so, because that's all they had to do. I mean, a country is not going to come to Armenia's defense when there's doubt as to what the truth is, only when there's conviction. But they constantly were chiseling away at that conviction. So it was really tough. It was really tough for us. On the other hand, what was so devastating for all of us in Armenia, all of us everywhere, was that, we were getting daily reports, and we'd get reports that these 3 villages, for example, were taken by the Azeris. And then we were told by the Armenian press that that was a lie. And so we started like laughing at Aliyev every time like he would talk, like fake news, and just accusing them of just lying. And so when the war ended and we realized that a lot of those times, actually, it was our press that was lying, it was our information, and that those villages were being taken, that this amount of boys were being killed. That was, it was just devastating. I don't know. I think that as Americans, we're still, I mean, the cynicism is growing. It's clear to all of us that we're becoming more and more cynical. But like relative to like a Brit or some other European nation, like an Italian who's lived with corruption and government for so long that they never believe their politicians. Like we still are surprised when a politician lies, even though like we're so cynical. In Armenia, even though there's been a lot of corruption, I just think that we wanted to believe the best here, and it hit like a ton. And it's hard to know what was going on. I'm no expert in it, and my focus was never on the political side of it. I mean, it was just dealing with the human impact of it. But I mean, if Nicole Bishinian had just said, listen, we needed to keep this war going a little longer. We understood what was happening. We knew we were getting decimated, but France was coming closer. We had a growing number of senators in the U.S. We thought if we could just hold on long enough to get 2 or 3 nations behind us, then maybe we could arbitrate this thing where we wouldn't lose much land. I mean, if he would say that, and if he would just have said that, when this war started, we didn't know that Turkey would be all in. We knew there was rhetoric, but we really thought that we were fighting the Azeris, and we honestly didn't know that they were fighting with 2021 weapons and we were fighting with 1995 weapons. We just didn't realize it. And if there was more of the apology, but there was constantly the bickering and people accusing each other, and people just got really upset and angry. And frankly, at the Opera House, you would have, in the Parliament building, you'd have the anti-government rallies, and at the Republic Square, you'd have the pro-government. But wherever you were, people were broken up and discouraged and disillusioned, and and that, again, we're just talking about all that of the political realities. Then you have the real reality of 10,000 wounded soldiers and the 5,000 dead plus. And now there's reports of 200 POWs. There were a good percentage of them have been killed recently. We're just not sure what it is, but yeah, really hugely impactful. I would just say though that I don't even want to use the language of silver lining or if there's a good side, because it was just so painful. But the reality is God does use things like this, and he is. And people need to know that God is redeeming this, and there's an openness now that simply didn't exist before. And I remember before the war, just weeks before the war, people saying, this the guys in Armenia are so shut down to the gospel right now. I just remember some people saying that, the whole conversation about it, and they're not right now. And we have a window here. And again, there's trauma everywhere, but um, right now it's soon enough where they're talking about their trauma. That won't continue. You guys all know about trauma. It doesn't stay on the forefront forever. It will get stuffed down. It will be internalized, and it will be manifested in anger and other things. Like, we have a window now where they are willing to talk about it, and that's why we started these retreats for wounded soldiers that are designed specifically for unbelievers. And we've had 3 so far. And the last one we did in partnership with Young Life, we had 80 wounded soldiers there, and 70 gave their lives to Jesus. And it was just spectacular. It was, the theme was Hamer. Every soldier knows the Hamer, and we just brought a lot of life to it, something they already knew. And it was just seeing God do what God does, because Jesus is actively pursuing a bride for himself. And each of these boys, they're just the bride, and Jesus is just there's the passion in which you can have that sense that God is so passionately pursuing them, knowing their grief, knowing their trauma, and then the corresponding grief for all the young women too. Armenia is already the number 7 country for more women than men before the war. So like, those numbers are awful. And to have just lost another 5,000 boys, that's pretty traumatic, for them, because there aren't young men for all the young women in Armenia. And so I know this sounds so silly after talking about something so serious, but you have some single young Armenian men. I don't know why they don't go to Armenia. They're just some of the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life. It's extraordinary. And so we were at a wedding a few days ago on Sunday, and we were taking a picture, and one of the girls like, please send this to some Armenian men in America and tell them to come. But then there were 10 different girls, and we have to post that picture. They'll come. That's the best way we can recruit young men to come to Armenia.
Yeah, I think they did a study 10 years ago too. They're rating the attraction level of men and women by nationality. Armenia was number 1 for women. They didn't make it on the men's side though.
No, we didn't. We actually, it was the Huffington Post, and we did not make the top 40 list.
No, the guys didn't. But the way to represent Armenian women.
Oh my goodness. Well, in terms of the continuing impact, probably most people have seen that picture of Aliyev walking through that war memorial with helmets and hats of fallen soldiers, and all of that. It does have a cumulative effect on people. About 40% of Armenians would literally leave tomorrow, they say, if they had the opportunity to. And many are leaving. There's been a lot of people who've left the country, and I honestly, I get it. My goodness, if I was 30 years old, with all the rhetoric that continues here, one of the negotiating pieces of the war was that there would be a war from Nakhchivan to Azerbaijan, and now they're saying that road isn't enough. They want a corridor, and he made it very clear. He just right out and said, if you don't give it to us, we're going to take it. And they've been talking about taking the southern Sunni region for quite a long time. It's why Iran has 1 million plus troops. Some people put it at much higher numbers, is because the top third almost of Iran is the Azeri province with 18 million Azeri Iranians. So who knows what's going to happen? So one way or another, we have a window here, and I'm saying that it honestly may be the most significant open window that we've had in 3,500 years of our history and 2,000 years of our church history. It's an extraordinary opportunity we have right now to reach this generation in Armenia. And it's happening. It's not it's just not flowery language in order to make it appealing or to raise money or anything like that. Like, it's literally happening. And like my team, I've got this amazing team of young men and women. They're extraordinary, and they are like truly like family to me. And then a whole secondary tier to it, and it's just growing. And but they all have like TikTok pages where they're sharing the gospel to 6,000, 7,000 people a week. And of course, each of those 6,000 people have a family or social sphere of 30, 40 people. So now we're just saying, okay, we've got 10 people from this village. We have 20 people in that town. Let's start a gathering. And we're saying, well, we can go to this village once a month. We can go to that town or twice a month. And it's starting to happen and unfold. That's just from one guy. And now we have a woman who's got 7,000 people who follow her. And it's just, it's really happening, and it's happening through multiplication, because every person you reach, every wounded soldier who finds Jesus, he's got a sphere of 30 to 40 people. And if you step into that world, there's another 10 people who are going to find Jesus. I mean, there is an openness, and we're living in this moment. There are 1,300 villages in Armenia, and there are 13 cities over 20,000. We can do it. We can do this. We can reach this generation, not just in our lifetime, but in this next 10 years, we can reach this generation. And I know it's not really good theology to quote this, but in Habakkuk 1:5, it says, God says, look, see, I'm going to do things in your day that you wouldn't believe even if I told you. And there is that sense here that God is saying, look, I want you to pay attention here, because I called you to be witnesses. And the primary job of a witness first is to just see. To be a witness, you have to see something. And God's like saying, I want you to look. I want you to see, because I am doing something in your day, not your grandmother's day or your children's day, but in this day that you just simply wouldn't believe. And I think this is a defining moment. I truly do. And I do believe, like when I read the Old Testament, I see the anguish of Israel crying out for 400 years, the prayers of God's people, Israel, for deliverance from Pharaoh and Egypt. And, they waited 400 years for that deliverance. And I do believe that 106 years later, God is saying, I heard the prayers of your grandparents and great grandparents when they were being killed in the genocide. God, save our people, save our land. And I just feel like those prayers have never dissipated. They've just been there at the throne of God. And it's in this moment, God says, okay, it's this kind of a convergence of so much that God's been doing in our history. Say, this is a moment we're going to raise up this generation of Armenians who have hurt, they've struggled. When I went to Armenia for the first time, is it okay that I'm talking so much?
The more you talk, the less I talk, the more I'm doing my job. So keep talking.
My goodness. When I just pull the plug on me when I start talking too much. When I went to Armenia 5 years ago, the first time, everyone, every young person that I spoke to, their whole goal in life was to get out of Armenia as soon as they could. That was it. I don't think I met anyone, no matter how nationalistic they were, who wanted to stay or hoped to stay. And then the Velvet Revolution happened. And honestly, it changed. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. I'm telling you, it changed. There was a remarkable change. And no one was talking about leaving anymore. And if they were, they would say, I just want to see America, but I'm going to come back. And I believe them. And now the pendulum has shifted again. And now, and that's tough. Just the emotion of seeing that pendulum shift again, and the disappointment. And so who knows what's going to happen next? All I know is that in spite of the changing context, because it continues to change, you can't lock into anything right now. You can't set your sights on anything and lock in. It's just changing. But regardless of that, the assignment hasn't changed at all. Just to go and care for the poor, to go to bring freedom to the prisoners and sight to the blind. Just to go. And we were just walking around the town of Gavad, which is near Savon, and we were visiting with a wonderful Baptist pastor there. I really appreciated my time with him. And right as we left out, the neighbors, the house right next to the church, they're down about 15, 20 feet, was a guy in crutches, and he had broken his leg and was in pain. So we just said, "What in the world happened to you?" And he told us. He said, "How would you think? What would you think of us praying for you?" And so he said, "Sure." And his mother and wife from the second floor said, "Don't let these people pray for you. We don't know them." And so he said, "No, it's okay." And so we prayed, and none of us have perfect faith for stuff like this. We don't. But I don't know. I prayed. Nothing happened. I said, "Can I just pray one more time?" He said, "Okay." He didn't care. He didn't know really what was even happening. All I know is he starts laughing, starts jumping up and down. He says, "I haven't moved my toe in 3 days." Now he's walking on it. He put his crutches down. So his mother came down. His wife came down. His mother has really bad back pain. And God really took that pain away. His wife has migraines and was having one. He took that pain away. So his mother pulls out the cell phone, calls her relatives. 2 cars show up. 12 people gave their life to Jesus right there. And that's what I'm saying. Like, that was an hour's work. And a family, a whole house Cornelius came to Jesus, and it's happening. And the great thing is that Baptist pastor was there to watch the whole thing. And God bless him. And his son, sadly, was killed in the war. And we tried to minister to his son. And his son hadn't really been walking with the Lord. And about a month ago, we spoke to a young guy who was in the same foxhole as that boy. And he's basically saying that how was he doing? And he said, "Oh, he was amazing. When the drones were firing on us, he kept calling all of us to like give our lives to Jesus, and he was praying for all of us." And that boy, even though he'd really walked away from Jesus, when those drones were raining it down, whatever that was inside of him came back to life, and he started sharing the gospel with everything. And so his father has the pleasure of knowing, at least in his son's final hours, he was truly following Jesus. But in the first week, we lost the worship leader at Your Word of Life Church, and it started getting very real. And I'm really close to a lot of the club leaders in Young Life, and Young Life it's a huge ministry in Armenia, and they've got gatherings of 20 to 30 people all over the place. And just in one club that I really love, there's about 30 kids in it, and five boys out of 30 were killed. Another club in Kentron was like, out of 25 kids, 4 boys were killed. I mean, that's how bad it was. But we kept digging in there, and I don't know. Over the last few weeks, I felt the Lord saying, like, the season of mourning is over. And I've been challenging people, the church, to it. That it's not like we forget. We never forget. I've got a mug here that says we will never forget. But it's time. And I think we know, like from the Song of Psalms, that there are seasons. And I think it's time to get back to our assignment, because this window, we don't know how long it'll stay open. And in terms of the Sunnik in the southern region, we don't know how long. I mean, I don't mean to be a doomsday. Who knows? I would like to believe that it'll always be in the hands of Armenia, but we know our history. We know our land has contracted and expanded throughout our history, and we've got to bring the gospel down there. We've got to start groups down there. We just have to, and we have to do it now. So it's really a time to get back to our core assignment, what it is that God's called us to do, and really trying to encourage pastors to, if you've been struggling with conflict with other pastors, this is the time to get over it. Like, literally have no time to deal with this anymore. We have to get past it. This offense that you had because one family left your church and went to another, stop it. It's just, we don't have time anymore. We've got to start churches in these other cities, in Megri and Kapan and Agarab down in the south. We've got to get down more in Goris. And so, and not to mention Stepanakert. I mean, I think some of those areas in Armenia are some of the most unreached areas. And I think a lot of us grieve that we didn't do enough in Stepanakert and Artsakh prior to this, and we have another window to say, hey, let's step into it, so we don't grieve again. And so, thankfully, by God's grace, we're able to minister in Stepanakert and get in. As a citizen, I have full access to get in, and so, and we've got a lot planned in there. But
yeah, I think it's so important because like one of the seeing the unity during the war, and then like we need to keep that unity post-war, when it comes to just within the different church denominations, the different political parties. I think that unity is so vital for us because we're so small. We need each other, and I mean, it was great to see the diaspora mobilize and support. What are your thoughts? Because a lot of Armenian diasporans from North America are like the main audience of this podcast. What would you say to them? Like, how could they help
well,
Armenia?
first of all, I do want to say, and thanks for bringing that up, but because the Armenians, the Haistansis, talked about that all the time. Like it was like, all the time that like, man, like they feel that connection. I think that if there is a kind of counter statement to that, it would just be that sometimes we have to be careful because, the Armenians in America tend to be more nationalistic than the Armenians there. I mean, they're just Armenian. They don't even think about this stuff. They live there. So, I mean, prior to the war, even in July, they made that effort into Tavush area. They said they were going to do more. Like we knew it, and yet everyone was just went on with their lives. And it on one hand, it's an amazing thing about Armenians. But one Azeri from Georgia made the comment, like, this is the problem with you Armenians. Like, we have raised our kids for the last 30 years to hate you. We've raised our kids to be warriors, talking that we're going to have our victory, we're going to have our payback. And you guys are raising your kids saying Azeris aren't bad people. And like, no wonder, like, but we're not like that. Where our fierceness, our strength comes in our love and our compassion, and it's a strength. Maybe it's a little bit of a weakness. I don't know, but I find as a diaspora in Armenia now living in Armenia, I'm just pretty blown away by these young people. But it was very obvious. A lot of what we did, I could do in supplying some really necessary equipment for our soldiers. Could only have happened because if I needed money, if I needed $10,000, I just had to say it. And for some of the stuff, $10,000 didn't even go far, but we got what we needed. And there are several units where people survived because of it, and it made a huge difference. So, in terms of getting involved, I'm obviously I'm sure those who are listening are well aware of the MAA and other organizations that are doing great work in terms of the relief side of things. But I would also be digging into prayer for that singular thing of reaching this generation. Like we can get razor sharp in our focus. Let's reach this generation. There's other work to do, and we do have to reach the poor. We have to do that. In our ministry, we have one person who's overseeing the poor, another sports, because again, we want to reach these 1,300 villages and 13 cities. But with regard to the villages, where our hope is to put 4 missionaries in each set of 4 villages. That means in the end, we need 400 teams. And then in each set of 4 villages to have like an English club, a Bible Christian club, and a football soccer club. And then create a league out of that around the country. So I really do believe we can. So, some people may say, I want in on that. Like I'm willing to kind of move and help kind of care for gathering of people in a group of 4 villages and with 3 or 4 other people my age, and just be part of it. And it's great. And, we helped get a mixed martial arts studio set up in Vadnazor. Within a month, there was about 120, 130 people, about 80 people came to Christ. Like that's the openness here. So now we're talking about taking this studio to the next level, getting into a bigger place and starting on something in Spitalk, and then moving up to Greenery and just start getting these things. Boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like these, and mixed martial arts, they're very attractional for these young guys who, and uh, so we're just seeing where the open doors are. Uh, so working with sports coaches and yeah, just a lot of fruit. So I just say that whatever people's gift mix is, whatever their particular talent is, from accountant to evangelist, to whatever it is on the spectrum, there's a vital place if God were to be calling you. And if he's not calling you, there are general ways to get involved. And I'm sure if you latch on to myself or any ministry, they would have ways to do that. And so people should feel free to private message. But it ought to be more than writing checks. I mean, none of this happens without it. I mean, setting up a mixed martial arts studio costs money, and start another one costs money. But they are now. When I talk about that law of multiplication, where if 100+ kids are now finding faith, and now we're looking at starting a church there, but each of these kids has 30 people and 30 friends, then suddenly we've just reached 500-600, and then that just keeps multiplying out. So I would say, on Easter there's a stadium in Yerevan called Hrazdan Stadium. It's a big football stadium, and I just felt like in 2 years we're going to have a massive Easter service in there, and I'm praying it happens. I think we could do it. I think we can have 10 to 20,000 people in there. And you're right. Every church, something special happened. We were already primed because of COVID to have compassion, where some of the bickering wasn't there, and then the war, of course. And I do hope it continues across the board. I pray that the perception of the Apostolic Church towards the Pentecostal Church would evolve and change. It is in many cases the same with the Pentecostals and Evangelicals, and I just pray that somehow we could find that. And I really do, as part of my calling there, is to build bridges like that. And because I grew up in the Apostolic Church, and it drives some of them crazy because I call myself, an Appa evangelical, and I just don't know what to do with me sometimes. But I do. I just really appreciate it. I've gotten to be friends with a number of priests, and there's a growing number of priests who have just authentic faith, and they love to talk about the Bible. A lot of these priests don't have the opportunity of really really expressing and like fighting through issues, because there's a doctrine that they're meant to agree on, but sometimes you want the freedom to push and say push against something, and they don't always have the freedom to do that, but they do with an older guy like me who's comfortable doing that. And I just think there's a lot of relationships, and so there's a number of priests who have asked about meeting regularly, and so I just think there's open doors everywhere. And then the perception is changing too. The one bishop said, when Sork was on, he said that we're all like different leaves of the same tree. And that's something that no priest would have said 15 years ago. To even say that we were connected to the same trunk and had the same roots is an extraordinary thing. And I have to say, regarding the Apostolic Church, if I wasn't so busy myself, I would have made it a big part of my ministry to care for them, because those priests, they were either out on the front lines of battle, or they were doing funerals morning till night. And then at the end of the night, they kept their churches up to 2:00 in the morning so that people could come and pray. They were all fried. God bless this one dear friend. His name is Gabriel, the high sword there in the Whipsmith Church in Edgemancy, a good man, but he's serving his people, man. So they were blowing me away, just across the board. And again, my friend who's a priest was lost during the war. The troops loved him, and
Greg, thank you so much for this conversation. I love your heart for just trying to build those bridges, not care about the labels, but more importantly, you're focusing on the next generation. You're not even caring about your legacy, but the legacy of the generation that will come after you. And that's really what it's all about, investing in that next generation, caring about the future. So it's really just great to see your heart for just focusing on the youth and the future of Armenia. This is a great conversation. Thanks for joining the program, and look forward to staying in touch, brother.
Thank you. And hello to all the people watching. Love you guys too. Thanks, Mike.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.